Very fit, played sport. He was a plumber, so he was always very active, never sick. And he was just a fine young man. You know, he was only 23. We went to the reception area and they just took a few details. Dr. Bailey wasn't there, but he was to see him later. To my knowledge, there was no form signed, no consent for treatment, and they just said, fine, you know, you leave him here, and there's no visitors allowed for about 10 days to 2 weeks. And I was, you know, a little bit amazed at that, and I just said, well, I'll be back to see him soon, and I'll ring you in the morning. And that's where I left Graham. I went to the hospital during the time I thought would be visiting hours, 7 to 8. He was already quite heavily sedated. I guess the alarm bells were starting to ring. So I called Dr. Bailey and told him that I was shocked to see Graham so heavily sedated, that I felt sure that Graham would not have understood that a few days' rest in hospital could possibly mean this sort of treatment, that I'd never seen this treatment, and that I wasn't happy about it, and that I wanted it stopped. I went to the hospital the next evening and I found Graham to be more deeply sedated. He was lying flat on his back. His arms were restrained and strapped to the bed, and he had a nasogastric tube in place, indicating to me that he was, the sedation had been increased and that he now did not have a swallow reflex, and that was used to give him his fluids and sustenance. I felt panic, and I went to the desk to find some staff and asked them, why he was like this, what had happened, what was going on with the treatment, that, was the sedation lighter? And they appeared not to know anything about the lightening of the sedation. They couldn't tell me any details, and they suggested that I ring Dr. Bailey again. And due to the late hour of the night, I didn't ring him then. And it was in the early hours of that morning that Dr. Bailey rang me and said that Graham was dead.
Before Graham Carter entered Chelmsford, 8 patients had already died of deep sleep treatment. 5 had died in 1964 alone, and nobody blew the whistle. It was only when Jane went to the police and there was a subsequent coroner's inquiry that the first real chance of stopping the treatment occurred. But although the coroner expressed concern at the level of drugs given to Graham, he failed to refer the case for further action.
I felt angry and frustrated that, given medical evidence at the inquest and the information that came to light, it was evident that there was a lot of doubt and concern surrounding this treatment and Dr. Harry Bailey, and it appeared that nothing was ever investigated or followed up, meaning that more lives were to be lost.
Some happier times?
Yeah, they were the good times then.
They were the good days. That was the official opening of the club, remember?
Yeah.
With the mayor.
Yeah, Boys Club's Road Club, Happy said the supervisor. Let me get to the funeral. He used to work out in the gym next to the Police Boys Club. I'd get in there with him and muck around with him, lifting up weights and stuff, or trying to. You know, it's little things like that. You know, I used to copy things he did. You know, certain ways he'd lean against the wall and I'd copy that. And just, you know.
Peter Clark began to suffer from unexplained headaches and bouts of nausea and was referred by his GP to Dr. Bailey. Then, after a particularly bad bout of giddiness, Peter Clark asked his wife to take him back to Bailey.
Now, he really believed in him, like all his other patients did. And he just, you know, begged Mum to take him there. So that's where she took him. I remember my brother and I were in bed about 10 o'clock. The phone rang, and I heard my mother scream when she picked it up. Dr. Bailey told her over the phone that my father had just died from a massive heart attack. And she screamed, she screamed. She said, "I don't believe you, know."
He was a 31-year-old police officer. That tells me that I would anticipate that he was physically fit. He was given quite large doses of barbiturates, and I think the respiratory nature of his death seems to be substantiated by the events on the evening when he received ECT, and shortly afterwards was found to be cyanosed. Now, cyanosis simply means that the blood has got very much less oxygen in it than it would normally have, and indicates, to my mind, that he would be effectively starved of oxygen, asphyxiating, if you like. But the circumstantial evidence here looks very much as though he died of respiratory failure.
Peter Clark's death certificate, authorised by Bailey, makes no mention of respiratory failure or deep sleep treatment. 3 years and 7 deaths later, the death of Miriam Polio, admitted with depression after breaking up with her boyfriend.
Miriam was a very healthy, physically healthy 26-year-old young woman. And when she went under sedation, no one expected any complications. Why would you?
By 1977, there can be no doubt that all the Chelmsford doctors should have known the dangers of infections during deep sleep treatment. Dr. Bailey himself had referred to it in his lecture to the nurses. Yet Miriam Polio died of gangrene of the bowel, a complication that remained undiagnosed by any of the Chelmsford doctors, in spite of the concerns expressed by the nurses.
We'd been sort of told about the other people, you know, they weren't well, you know, they would have killed themselves anyway, or they were on a path of destruction, or they've destroyed their bodies and their hearts gave out, and that sort of thing. But there was no explanation for Miriam. And it was very devastating, and it really caused a lot of problems with the staff. In fact, it was really interesting that sometime after, not long after Miriam's death, John Gill came to me and he said, "We better have another barbecue. We have to increase the staff morale."
6 weeks after Miriam Polio died, Dr. Gill's patient John Adams, a 25-year-old drug addict, died after undergoing a particularly heavy version of the deep sleep regime. Double doses of sodium amytal, methadone, largactil, Valium, Tuinal, Tranxene, and Ulactil clearly precipitated his death.
The point really at issue is that with the very large dose of barbiturates and the normal doses of some of these other drugs, there is a risk of very significant interaction. That in fact the pumping